And I'm glad to be here. We'll talk about toileting and, as I said, try to answer your questions as well. So, just a little bit of background. In addition, when I work in the toileting clinic, I do work with a medical provider, so we address both medical concerns and behavioral issues around toileting. I'm going to mostly focus on behavioral, but I'm going to touch a little bit on the medical piece because I do think that's an important part of thinking about helping your child become toilet trained. All right, so we're going to try to talk about, the challenges involved with this, talk about key components of a successful toileting program, and a little bit about materials and resources as well. So as I mentioned, I think it's really important to think about medical considerations. You always kind of want to check with your healthcare provider. Think about possibly constipation, any kind possibly urinary tract infections, any kind of voiding dysfunctions. Some of these can be related. When you have constipation, you can also have problems with peeing. So I think that's an important piece. In clinic, we're always trying to make sure that we're not missing anything medical. And also, when we're considering medical factors, sometimes those need to be done before we move into a toileting program. I just worked with a family today where there was clear constipation. The child really didn't want to sit on the toilet for pooping. He was starting to do some things with pee, and we said, let's kind of focus on pee and not worry about poop, because we really don't want sitting on the toilet to be associated with hard, painful poop. So we really want to think about those things. I wanted to just show you just a little bit and think a little bit about constipation so you can think about that for your child. This is the Bristol stool chart, and pediatricians and other medical providers use this to kind of get a sense of where things are. And you could see type 1 little pellets, it's very constipated, all the way down to very liquid poop, which is type 7. And type 4 is kind of what we want, which is sort of a smooth sausage-like or snake-like poop. So we're often seeing children who may have constipation. Sometimes someone has enough stool kind of backed up in their colon that they might get some liquidy poop that kind of goes around the hard poop that's stuck in the colon. So you want to be thinking about how often someone's pooping, what their poop looks like, if they're engaging in any kind of withholding behavior. And this slide I like to show because it sort of shows how the colon can get very stretched out if there's a lot of poop stuck in there. And once the colon is stretched out, it can sometimes take a long time for the colon to get back in shape. And the implications of that are important. One thing that happens with a stretched out colon is that the individual with that type of colon sort of loses more sensation that gives them the clues that they need to poop. If you imagine like a balloon that's been stretched out, it doesn't go back to its original form before it's ever been blown up. So a colon that's stretched out, you're not going to feel the stretch, which is a clue to need to poop. You're also going to have more trouble keeping the poop in, and you can get this kind of leakage and smears for a while. And depending on the severity of the constipation and the length of time someone has been constipated, it could take 6, 9, 12 months for a colon to fully get back in shape. So we really think about constipation carefully, both in terms of thinking about a toileting program and thinking about what's going to happen after we've started addressing constipation. When we're thinking about voiding dysfunction, we're thinking about, peeing when in your diaper, or not peeing in the toilet. Why? Maybe your bladder is irritated. You might have urinary tract infections, which we'd want to think about. There could be pain associated with it. Some individuals start withholding, which causes difficulties, and constipation can cause difficulties with peeing as well, because if you've got a lot of stool in your colon, it presses up against your bladder and you have more trouble with peeing and feeling the sensation around that too. So in our clinic and in my approach, I think it's always important to really take a team approach. As I said, I work with a medical provider, but besides that, we need to think about families, school members, therapists, healthcare provider to kind of work together. And really, from my view, the most important person in that team is parents, family. You all know your child best of anyone. You know what will work and what won't work. and you've probably tried a lot of things. People who come to our clinic, they've been working on toilet training for a while. We rarely see people that are just giving it a first shot at trying this, and so they have a good sense of what might work or what might not work. So for me, it's very important to think of myself as a consultant to families, that we work together, that a family's knowledge of their child, what works for their child, what works for their family, along with some knowledge that I have about toilet training and strategies that might work. We're going to work together to make this happen. I also think it's often helpful to start with little steps and see how that goes, troubleshoot those as you need to, and then build up. So we'll often start a program where maybe we're having a child sit once a day, just so we get a sense of, are you okay sitting on the toilet? How does that work? Can we get some success when we pick a time when you're most likely to need to pee or poop? And we can kind of build from there. There's a lot of research on toilet training. Behavioral therapists really did groundbreaking work years and years ago with individuals back in the day when people were in institutions. They showed that even much older adults who'd been institutionalized for a long time could be toilet trained. It was a very intensive program, and there were negative consequences associated with it, aversives, but it worked really, really well. So that isn't an approach that I want to follow, and I don't recommend that approach for families who come to our clinic. And I think that kind of intensive approach can be done in a very positive way as well. So I always want to acknowledge that that's there, but in my experience, a slow, gradual approach tends to work best. It avoids possible challenges around children who will then become very avoidant of the toilet or feel that it's an aversive situation. I think my approach is also highly colored by the fact that people who come to our clinic, they've tried a lot of things, and often including an intensive behavioral or ABA approach, and it hasn't worked. But there are plenty of families where that has worked, and of course they're not going to come to my clinic. So that's a piece that I think is important to acknowledge as well. So when we're starting to think about a toileting program, we need to get some information from families. We need to know what a child's eating, how much fiber, are there dietary restrictions? Does the child have some areas where they just won't eat certain foods, or they'll only drink milk? How much water and fluids are they drinking? How much are they peeing? How much are they pooping? When does it happen, as far as families can tell? That kind of information is all important in trying to sort through a plan, because eating fiber helps, but you can't just have fiber. You need to have plenty of fluids as well. And of course, getting a pattern of if a child's withholding and not pooping as often. We really like to see a poop just about every day. For some individuals, maybe every other day. But longer than that, we're going to start thinking about whether some withholding is going on. And we're careful about that as well. I want to add that one of the things we see with constipation is someone who is constipated and feels like it's going to hurt to poop, they might hold more. And the more they hold, the more harder their poops get, because water gets drawn out of the colon, and then it hurts even more to poop, so they withhold even more. So we really want to get a good sense of what we're seeing in terms of eating and drinking and pooping and peeing patterns, so we can address those and work with those in a way that will be helpful. I think it's hard. I know many families I work with are very, very busy. They've got a lot going on, and it's hard to collect a lot of data. So sometimes we can start collecting this data as we work together, and it doesn't have to be a really detailed diary. Some families like to do that, and they do a great job with it, and there's apps to help. But sometimes just getting a general sense of how things are going is good enough to start, and then you can fine-tune some of that data as you start working on toileting. Okay, so we always want to think about a child's strengths and what their needs or challenges are. So we're going to think about their communication skills, motor skills, whether they're anxious, which often comes up in our clinic, any sensory issues that need to be addressed. How well do routines help this person? How are they flexible around routines? Is it important to think about how we're going to establish things so that we're respecting their need for routine right from the start. For example, another family I worked with recently, we were going to start by just having this child kind of just go into the bathroom and sit on the toilet without needing to pee or poop, and get used to being in the bathroom. And because of how routine based this individual is, decided that would be important to do at specific times during the day right from the start, so that there wouldn't be any difficulties in changing that routine, even though they weren't actually going to be trying to pee or poop on the potty yet. And then how well does someone generalize? We want to look at whether, we can start with just one bathroom. Do we need to start thinking early on about trying different bathrooms? I've worked with some children where they'll only pee in one bathroom in the house and only poop in another one. Pooping and peeing outside of the home can often be very challenging, and so we want to think through what kind of program we're going to develop to address those issues. So, as I mentioned, it's very important when we're thinking about a good, healthy GI system to get plenty of fluids. We want fiber, but you need fiber with fluids. If you just increase someone's fiber without having the right amount of fluid, it's like you're going to cause a brick to form in their colon. And physical activity is really important as well. That literally helps keep things moving. So this is just one chart that kind of helps show the kind of daily fluid requirements we are thinking about for individuals based on age and gender. So this can often feel like a lot, so sometimes we need to gradually increase the amount of fluid. When we're talking about fluid, we think about, water, juice. There's pros and cons to juice, so you have to be careful about juice. Milk can be constipating, so people need milk. It's not to say not to have any, but you want to think carefully about how you're counting that, because these fluid requirements are helpful to keep you hydrated, but also to keep your poops nice and soft. There's lots of ways to get fiber. This is just an example of some of the kinds of things that you can, foods that are higher in fiber, and some of these are higher in fiber, and they also help with transit and help you poop a little bit more easily too, especially those first three: apples, pears, and prunes. Okay, so again, what does fiber do? Why do I keep talking about it? Well, it increases the bulk of your stool. It also helps soften it if you've got fluid with that, and it shortens the amount of transit time, which is helpful as well, both in terms of you being able to kind of time things and having a sense of when your child's going to be able to poop. Okay, so I mentioned exercise. I think for many individuals I work with, this is, like many things, easy for me to say, not always so easy to put into practice. But any way to kind of get moving helps. I really like the Good Morning Yoga books. There's a Good Night Yoga book that's great as well. Just taking a walk, sometimes just making it where you're going to park just a little farther away if you're taking your child someplace so they have to walk a little farther. There's a fun book called Sneaky Fitness that has some nice ideas in it as well. So as we start to think about, toilet training and thinking through this, there are environmental considerations we always want to consider. We want to make sure, of course, that the child feels secure and stable while sitting. We want feet to either touch the floor or a stable surface. Usually a stool helps with that. And we want knees above the hips. So if any of you have seen any of the ads for Squatty Potty is a great product. It gets you just in the right position. And the reason for that is that it helps straighten out the last little bit of your colon, and it helps the poop come down straight instead of around a curve, which is really nice. We want to think about making clothes easy to take on and off. Think about anything that might be making the individual feel anxious in the bathrooms. We want to think through that. For some families, it really helps to decorate the bathroom, maybe put in a reward chart so child can see what they're going to earn by doing this toileting task. And it often can be helpful to keep some special toys and books just for the bathroom as well. You always want to evaluate that. You want to make sure people know that the bathrooms for peeing and pooping, but especially for anxious children or children, it's just hard for them to sit. Anytime it's hard for them to sit, and then to sit to pee or poop, that we've got some things that are maybe toilet specific that will just add a little bit more motivation and or distraction for peeing or pooping, but not so distracting that we're not doing what we need to do. Okay, and there's books and videos that can help. There's toileting books that can capitalize on people's interests. There's all kinds. Some of them don't really make sense, but they work great. Like there's this whole train potty book that, trains obviously don't use the potty, but I've had great success using that book with children. There's pirate books and princess books. You can make one. You can make your own, of course. There's toileting videos, which I think can often be helpful. And then there's things like Elmo dolls, and you can have Elmo, model Elmo being on the potty and trying to pee and poop, and writing teaching stories or social stories around toileting and individualizing that for your child can often be a very helpful strategy. And this is just an example of a social story. This is it's a really good book on toileting by Maria Wheeler, and this is a nice little social story in there that I adapted just a bit, but it is from her book, just to give you an example of the kind of thing we mean. There's lots of other little aids and things that you can use that can help. So things that you can, especially for boys, right, that you can pee into that make it kind of interesting to pee can be helpful. So if you put red or blue food coloring in the toilet and then you pee, it changes color. So some children like that. Tinkle targets are just little, very thin little pieces of paper you can put in the toilet, and they have things on them, like you can buy sports themed ones and rockets and things like that. I've also worked with families where the family just makes their own on little squares of toilet paper. Worked with one little guy who loved letters and numbers, and so it was the ticket. He would, if he could pee on that, he would. Many people will talk about putting Cheerios in and pee on that. I have not had good luck with that because kids get that it's Cheerios and they want to reach in and get it, and that's not so good. There's watches you can use to help. A signal will go off, and then it's a sign that it's time to use the toilet. That can often be helpful either for the child themselves or for the adult, because one of the things we're talking about often when we're coming up with an initial toileting plan is scheduled trips or trip training to the toilet. So an individual learns, I pee and I poop when someone takes me to the toilet. It doesn't start by that person initiating those trips, but by learning that someone else is going to take them, prompt them to go, and that's when they're going to pee or poop. So sometimes that can be hard. Adults are busy. They can forget a child's schedule. So I have worked with some families where the adult wears the watch as a reminder. You could also program your phone. There are wet alarms that are used for nighttime training, but you can also use them during the day for some individuals where that can be helpful. And then we talked about the squatty potty, and then there's another nice, there's a number of different inserts you could use. I like the Mommy's Helper Contoured Cushy Step Up because it gets your feet in a good place. There's handles. There's a few examples for that. And that one, though, it's for 50 pounds or under. And so these just some visuals so you could see some of the kinds of watches. Wobble makes one. The potty watch is a nice watch. It looks like a potty, so it's not going to be appropriate for older children, and it's the makers of the watch know this. It's designed to not last. The battery doesn't last all that long because they didn't design this for individuals with special needs who might take longer to become potty trained. But I approached them when I wrote my book with Dr. Patel. I approached the Potty Watch people and asked them if we could put in some information in their book, and they were so nice, and they said, we'll give people a special code that they can use to get an extra set of batteries, which I thought was great, and that's in the book. I can also share that with anyone who needs it. And I had that little Barbie computer toy in the corner there to just show that having some special toy that maybe you just get to use when you sit on the toilet can be very effective at times. And in the middle is a sample tinkle target. Okay, so here you could see Mommy's Cushy Step Up. This is the squatty potty, and you could see here the difference between what happens to your colon at the very end when you're in a squatting position. You've got this nice straight line for the poop to come down rather than around a curve, which is very helpful. And then the cars example is just another example of a nice insert that might capitalize on someone's interests as well. So visual supports can be very helpful. I love these. I think they work for so many things. I started the sleep clinic. I use visuals in the sleep clinic. I think they're helpful for daytime behavior as well. And so it can be very helpful to use visual schedules to help your child know it's time to go, so they can look at their schedule and know we're going to go sit in the toilet, and also just what to do when you're in the bathroom. So you can go through the steps of opening up the lid, pulling down your pants, sitting down, etc. You can use visuals or other supports to help a child know how long they need to sit on the toilet too. And we talked about maybe starting with just one trip a day and then adding up till we get to maybe 5 or 6 times a day. But you can also gradually increase the amount of time you ask a child to sit on the toilet. So work with many children where, as I said before, maybe the task is going to be, we're just going to walk into the bathroom and see that it's safe and it's okay, and we're going to leave. We're not even going to sit on the toilet. Once we start sitting, maybe it's going to be like just a few seconds. We sat, we're okay, we're going to get off. And then gradually we'll increase the amount of time till someone is able to sit for about 5 to 10 minutes. So using timers to help children see how long we're expecting them to sit can be helpful as well, so it doesn't feel like it's forever. So these are a few examples of visuals that we'll use, a first then approach. We'd like families to know about the Autism Speaks Visual Supports toolkit, which is available free online and very helpful in terms of talking about different visuals. And these are just a few examples of the kinds of icons you could use. And this is another example, putting a reward chart right in the bathroom so that the child could see, I do my potty thing, whatever that potty thing is, and then I get my reward, which in this case is Legos. But you can get creative around this and even put, for some children, I'm not big on food rewards, but many children, that's the ticket. So sometimes you could put a snack bag there instead of that little Lego thing, and then the child could take the snack bag off and trade it in for maybe a few of the snacks that would be in there. So I think, as I mentioned, very helpful to just start establishing routines, a consistent time for toileting, making sure that everyone's kind of using the same words or signs to let a person know it's time to go to the bathroom. We're going to, as I said, start with short times and try to keep that routine consistent among all the adults working with your child. And when we talk about picking one time, again, we'll try to pick a time that hopefully is a time where we're likely to catch a pee or poop, but also a time that's good for families and that will work. And sometimes that's a nice natural transition, like maybe right before we go out of the house or right when we get home from school, things like that. This is just a schedule that just shows a school schedule, but you can also adapt something like this for home. And I like showing this slide because I think I'll often see families where children either will not pee or poop at school ever, or they'll only pee or poop at school. And sometimes that's because it's just been such a routine and all the other children are doing it too, and it's easier to do. So again, working with the school, finding out what's happening there, trying to coordinate can be helpful. So this is just a little bit of information for people who haven't used visual schedules, just a short guide to how you do this. I mean, the goal is to have an individual be able to do this on their own. So eventually you could say something like, check your schedule, see what's next, and they're kind of working on their schedule themselves. But of course, at first you're going to need to prompt them and help them learn how to use a visual. And you could start with a very short schedule so that they can learn and understand what's expected. So again, when we're thinking about when to go, we're going to eventually aim for about 6 times a day. It's going to vary from one individual to the next. Oftentimes morning is a really good time because many children will either wake up dry or shortly after they wake up, even if they wake up wet, they're ready to pee again. Mentioned, natural transitions are a very good time to do this in between activities, right? So you want to make sure, just like all of us, right? If we finally sit down and are doing something we enjoy, we really don't want to get up again and go try to use the toilet. So this is especially true for someone who's not into using the toilet. So before you start a fun activity, let's sit on the toilet. Could be a nice first then approach to that as well. After meals is a very good time because our bodies are wired to need to poop after we've gotten food in our stomach. Our stomach actually sends a signal up to our brain saying, there's food here, you better clear out colon, more is coming down, and that there's a reflex that helps with voiding around that. So that can be a very helpful way to establish specific times to sit on the toilet. It's often very helpful for people with a history of constipation. in particular. But you don't want to, you have to think about what's going to work for your family. I mentioned mornings can often be very helpful, but a lot of families will say to me, I cannot do one more thing in the morning. And we can't do this long involved toilet thing when I'm trying to get everybody out of the house. And so even though as we've reviewed things, it even looks like a good time in terms of physiology, like, okay, let's pick another time. If you can't do it, you can't do it. So you have to know what's going to work for you and work for your child. So when should you start toileting training? Well, really, when it's just a good time for everyone, I think. And again, thinking about the needs of your family, you could start with little steps. It oftentimes makes sense to take a break when there's a lot of other changes. So, many families I'm working with now, it's the start of the new school year, and absolutely have worked with some children where things have kind of been moving along and they've stalled a little. Children are more anxious, and we're just like, let's just take a break for a little bit. Let's stay where we are, and we'll keep working later, or let's just not start. People come to clinic, they've waited a while for an appointment. We've got a good plan in place, but we'll start it in another 2 to 3 weeks when all the newness of school has settled in and people have adjusted to that. Okay, so some children just refuse to sit. They'll say no, they won't want to do it. And so we want to think about, are they anxious? Are they just kind of I don't want to do this, but I'm not anxious about it, but it's not my thing. Sorting through that is helpful, but regardless, we're going to start where that individual is and then think through a nice set of steps that are going to help move that person along so that they can sit on the toilet and pee and poop in eventually, right? So this is just an example of someone who has a lot of hesitancy and perhaps anxiety about sitting on the toilet, and it is important to assess anxiety, as I've said before, but this is just one sample. It's going to vary from one individual to the next, but this is a way of helping them kind of move through the steps till finally they are sitting on the toilet, and there would be rewards for complying with each of these steps and going through them. So when we're thinking about reinforcers, again, we want to give rewards for, whatever the child's doing that's helping him or her move forward. I really like when it's possible to come up with toilet or bathroom specific rewards. So, if you are a child and you're getting and sometimes this has to happen, right? You've got all kinds of things during the day you're getting rewarded for, or you just get to do a lot of really fun things all day, which is also really nice. If one of those things is your reward for toileting and you kind of get it, you get to engage in that activity anyway for one reason or another, and you really don't want to sit on the toilet, you really might say, like, you know what, I'm good, it's okay, I don't need that reward. So, but if we make it very specific to the toilet, keep it positive, so we're not being, punitive in not giving that reward, but you get that reward when you do this toilet thing. That's how you get it, and otherwise you don't. It can be much more powerful. So I just think thinking through a reward can be all kinds of things. It can be an activity. It could be a special toy. It could be, it can be food. It could be a sensory activity, something social, books. And I think thinking through finding something that can be toilet specific if possible, be helpful. It's not always possible. I work with plenty of families where we can't do that, but thinking through and trying can be a helpful thing, and thinking through what kinds of rewards might work for your child. You could do tokens too. I do think for children who are highly resistant to using the toilet, having immediate rewards can be really important. So again, you just want to, kind of be a detective and problem solve around things. Are there fears? Are there any noises that might be bothering your child? Is positioning an issue? Many children Down syndrome have low tone. It's harder to sit in a way that's going to work. Can we think through some of that? Are there odors that bother the child? Is there anything around constipation or pain? And then for some children, they want privacy. They don't want to be separated from their family. So we kind of have to think through that. Is there one specific person that this seems to go better for versus others? How flexible is your individual? So you just kind of have to think through those kinds of things as you're coming up with a plan. And then again, as we're thinking about this, as we're teaching skills, so we want to consider motor development, how we're going to work on that, address all important sensory issues around that, think through how we're going to prompt these behaviors. And oftentimes when we're teaching specific skills like wiping, using a hand over hand approach with either forward or backward chaining is helpful. I often think recommend backward chaining for wiping in general. And just as an example for that, that's where like you and your child would both wipe together. You would either use hand over hand or hand under hand. So you're working together. I'll often say to families, you could start with the prompt, like I'll start and you finish, and you do almost all of it, and you let your child just finish the very last step, which at first might just be putting the toilet paper in the toilet. That's it. Once it's clear the child can do that, you start the wipe, you keep wiping, but you leave the last little bit of wiping for your child to do, and then he finishes that, puts the toilet paper in the toilet, and then you back up gradually so that your child's wiping more and more and you're wiping less and less over time. And once again, just thinking through how are we going to generalize those skills and keeping that in mind as we're teaching. So again, some of the common challenges we often see that we figure out ways. We've talked about refusing to sit, kids who are afraid of flushing. Some children are too focused on flushing, so we have to think through that. Children who want to play in the toilet, playing with water, they want to play with the toilet paper. They might be trying, but their aim is really poor. Wiping can often be a problem, and some children really need to kind of keep that diaper on in order to make progress. They've gotten so conditioned to peeing and pooping in their diaper that that's the only way they can do it. And so then when we want to think about strategies to deal with that as well. Once children have become trained and we're starting to think about public toilets, I think it's just always important to note that we have to think about what's called the hidden curriculum or unspoken rules about many things in society, but we're talking about toileting here. There's different rules for using a public bathroom than things that we spend a lot of time teaching our children that might not be so appropriate in the bathroom, right? Like we say, make eye contact with someone, say hello to them, talk to them. You don't do that at a bathroom, right? You keep to yourself, you don't go up to someone else. So we have to think through that. We have to help boys learn how to use the urinal, what stall do you go in, how do you do that, kind of keeping track of those things so a child learns that and thinking about how to teach them that. And that can often be a nice gradual approach where you can be in that bathroom with the child and help them do that. And this, of course, is once a child can be independent using the toilet, but I think it's an important piece to kind of note. So there definitely can be accidents that happen, and I think the best approach to that is to be just neutral. There's no punishing. If you can change in the bathroom, it's helpful. Many families who can't for a variety of reasons, empty the diaper in the toilet, have your child see that if possible. Sometimes it helps to have the child sit on the toilet after. You don't have to do that, but you can. And maybe having the individual help with cleanup if that is non-putative and not reinforcing. I worked with a family who little boy loved doing laundry. It was his favorite thing to do. So it didn't help for him to help. It wasn't a good idea for him to help clean up and put things in the laundry after he had an accident. So you just want to think through that. And again, we don't want it to be a negative thing. So, and sometimes it's just really hard to have kids and be involved in the cleanup, and it's okay not to. So I mentioned that some children might need night diapers in order to pee or poop. So some people say you have to be in underwear to make progress. I disagree with that. The Autism Speaks toolkit that I worked on for toileting, it was there were sites excuse me, all over the country, and some people felt very strongly about that. So there's actually something about wearing underwear in that toolkit. But I feel like it's very dependent on a specific individual and their needs. I have worked with many, many children who they don't recognize the signs that they need to pee or poop. They're not peeing or pooping in their pull-up or their underwear to be naughty or to cause a problem. They just don't feel it, and they just pee and poop, and they don't get it. And they don't particularly mind being wet or dirty either. So being in underwear when you're at that stage of toilet training just makes a lot more work for families, and it doesn't help encourage a child to go. In the toilet. I have also seen some children where the timing really matters in terms of making that transition. And I have personally worked with children who start with holding when they're in underwear because it feels too soon for them and they're kind of freaked out by it. And then they just figure out, well, if I just don't pee or poop or I wait a really long time, I won't have to do this thing because I'm not sure I can make it to the toilet. And that's not helpful. We don't want withholding urine. We don't want withholding poop. We've talked about how much that could be harmful for a child. So I take a slow approach to this. I worked with one child not that long ago who he was there. He was toilet trained. We just needed to make the transition. And he didn't like the idea of wearing underwear. And we went just a little too fast. And he started withholding again. We were able to back it up because we were all watching for that. And I use Wheel app, but parents do the work. I'm just there to consult. But so it was okay. But it was a reminder to me that you have to watch that and be careful. So I think the timing is really key. And I do work with some children who really need to use a diaper. They'll sit on the toilet with a diaper as a first step toward making this transition from being comfortable using a diaper to pee or poop to being able to use the toilet to do that. And I have the little kids fighting because I just feel like sometimes it could be very contentious around underwear versus not. And so it's just my own little visual joke. All right. So, and by the way, if there's a child who does this, needs to wear a diaper while they sit on the toilet, we go through a hierarchy around that where first they're just sitting on the toilet with their diaper. Once they're able to pee or poop while sitting on the toilet with a diaper, the next step would be to sit on the toilet with a specially prepared diaper with a little hole in it that they put on obviously just right before they sit on the toilet, and then you'd gradually make that hole bigger and bigger. We had very good success with that approach for many families. Wanted to just talk a little bit about bedwetting. It's a common concern. I think it's important to remember that is it new? Has your child just started wetting the bed again after not wetting the bed for a long time? Then, especially when we're thinking about children with Down syndrome, you want to be thinking about obstructive sleep apnea and at least making sure that that's addressed. Doesn't mean it necessarily is the reason, but you want to consider that. If your child's always been wetting the bed, developmentally, they probably just haven't made that progression yet. I always think it's helpful to remember that just in terms of average, it is average, but that girls don't stop wetting the bed till about age 6 and boys age 7. And then we're also usually looking at individuals who have a developmental level of at least 4 years. So it doesn't mean that you have to have that developmental level in order to stop wetting the bed, but it may mean that you want to think about when you're going to do a program and how you're going to think about that depending on an individual's developmental level. Family history is really important. Bedwetting runs in families. So if someone in the family wet the bed at a late age, we might expect that also of this individual that we're thinking about. And I mentioned sleep issues because if you've worked really hard to help your child learn to sleep, fall asleep at a good time, sleep through the night, get up at a certain time in the morning, you might be less inclined to work on bedwetting right away because many of the strategies will involve waking up during the night. And that may or may not make sense at a particular time in a child's life. But in any case, if we're going to be thinking about bedwetting, constipation, here it is again, that can be a factor in wetting the bed at night, again, because of all that pressure on the bladder. But we want to make sure a child's drinking lots of liquid during the day, which we kind of want to do anyway, because we may restrict liquids about an hour, hour and a half before bed, unless the child is really involved in sports or very active in the evening. And then thinking about bladder irritants is helpful too. So things like caffeine, which you shouldn't have before bed anyway, but caffeine, citrus drinks, carbonated beverages, artificial red and purple dyes can be an irritant to the bladder, which can then result in more difficulties with bedwetting. Wet alarms can work very, very well. The research really supports that as the best approach for addressing bedwetting throughout the night. You can wake up your child. I've had good luck with some families where right before the parents go to bed, they wake up their child one last time, have them go to the bathroom. We're often in a deep sleep early in the night, so there's some challenges around that, but it can work. And then also waking up early in the morning, so you're kind of bookending things, and that can sometimes take care of it. Again, some data around that can be helpful as well. We can work on, for some children, it can help to work on retention control during the day. There's biofeedback and pelvic floor exercises, and there is medication you could take for bedwetting. Generally, that's for specific times, like, you're on vacation, you don't want bedwetting while you're in the hotel, sleepover, camp, things like that. But there are medications that can help. It doesn't teach you to stop wetting. It just stops the wetting for that period of time. And this is just so you could see, this is just a sample of how the wet alarms work. There's lots of different types, including some nice models that can send a signal to a parent. Because if we're talking about, so this is, during the night, this child's got this on, first sign of a little bit of pee, and you're going to get a vibration or a loud noise. And so there's also models that alert a parent, because oftentimes children still need a parent to help them figure out what they're going to do now that they're up, because they might pee. And I have used those alarms sometimes with children during the day as well, and that has worked effectively for training. So it can take 6 to 8 weeks to work. Sometimes you could see a little bit of change after a week, but you want to have at least 7 to 14 days of dry nights, and then you can either just take a break and see if things are working, or you can do some overlearning. Many children need a booster session, so it'll work for a little while, it'll stop working, and then you need to kind of do it again. So there's just a couple of examples of that. I think it can help to practice during the day, kind of rehearse the routine so everyone knows what to expect during the night. Again, I think teaching stories are really helpful, and rewards, because this is, it's a hard thing. So getting rewards for that cooperation can be very helpful. So whether we're talking about, trip training during the day, helping a child eventually become independent in all parts of toileting, what we're thinking about during the night, it's a difficult skill. Everyone I work with makes progress. It can take some time, but they do. I think that it's really important not to blame anyone around this, and to just, every step that's successful, to be really happy about that. To remember, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's going to take some time to do, and you kind of take one step at a time. So you start with 1 time a day, you start working toward 5 or 6, you've got trip training down, then you could start thinking about ways to help your child, help that they need to go to the toilet, and with patience, all of that will come in play. And oftentimes, getting back to bedwetting, we'll make sure daytime training is well in hand, if not all done, before we work on nighttime training. So those were the main things I wanted to cover during my talk. We do have some time for questions. I'm going to now look at the chat and see what's in there for questions, and also open it up for any other questions people may have. So let's see. We've got, okay, so 2 questions. A 4.5-year-old has been potty training for 1.5 years. She'll go on the potty but still uses a diaper. If she pees on the potty, how long would you put her on again? 2 hours? 2 hours is a good estimate. I think sometimes collecting some data about that can help too, but generally that's a good rule of thumb. It's about 2 hours. I have worked with some individuals. They've been checked medically. They're fine. They don't drink more water than we might expect someone to drink, a reasonable amount of water, well within the guidelines, and they're peeing every hour. So you do want to collect some data around that, but I love that, and it's great that she's still using the diaper, but it sounds like she's starting to also pee in the toilet. Panties inside the diaper strategy. What do I think of it? I think it could be really helpful. It's sort of the same thing we're kind of talking about. You want to make sure that it's going to be helpful, right? So this is, a child should be sort of recognizing some signs that they've peed, or recognizing that they need to pee, in order for that to be, I think, particularly effective. But it can work very well. It's often a very nice transition from using diapers to wearing underwear. So I think it can be fine. It's sort of the same issue of timing. When is the best time to do that? I really feel like, you guys are busy. You've got a lot going on. You don't have to do extra unless it's going to be helpful. And it can be. There's a place for that, for sure. And that strategy can be very helpful. When we talked about the wet alarms, they don't always work as well with pull-ups, because the whole idea is that they're very sensitive to any little bit of moisture. So sometimes you need to wear underwear. And so I think sometimes the panties inside the diaper could be a great way of addressing both those things. I'm working with someone right now who, when he was wearing underwear, parents kind of tried this before they came to our clinic, and he kind of just stopped peeing. He started peeing once a day, which is not okay. We really should be peeing about every couple, 3 hours throughout the day. So we're just starting this now, but we're thinking we're just going to start with the sensor and the pull-up because we're worried that he just won't pee if he's got briefs on. So I think it can really kind of depend on the individual and what's going to happen. And this person that I'm talking about, we're going to start, because he is so sensitive to change, just having the sensor in the pull-up without plugging it in, without doing anything, just so he gets used to this extra thing that's in his pull-up and make sure that feels okay to him. Okay. Next question. And if people who type in a question, if you have a follow-up question to my answer, I'm glad to answer that as well. We're told from daycare that our kiddo, who's 3.5, will go potty with a friend. How do we replicate that experience at home? We're not sure we can borrow his friend from school. That is a very good question. And I love it for a number of reasons. One thing you could try that may work, if you can do this, is whether either you might start with maybe another adult being there with the friend, so that so your child kind of gets used to, well, it's not just my friend, it's an adult as well, and or yourselves, right? So again, I get he's in daycare because you're working, but if there are times like maybe at the beginning of daycare, at the end of daycare, if the friend's still there, maybe you can go along with the friend so that your child could start pairing that and knowing, like, yeah, I do it with my friend, but I also do it with my mom or my dad as well. That kind of thing actually happens a lot. We'll see children, and it works, I've done it both ways. Children will only pee at school with a particular teacher, or children won't pee at school, they'll only pee with their mom. And we'll do the same kind of pairing where we'll have mom and an adult, the adult school staff person go together and then gradually fade the other person away. So it may work to try something like that with the friend and see, and depending on how that works for your child, you might want to, might be enough to just do it a few times with you and the friend, but maybe you'd want to go to daycare a couple of other times when it's just you, and see if that can generalize, and then that might work for you to be able to do it at home. I think it's fantastic that he could do it with his friend, which is really great. I also wonder, sometimes it's about being a little creative, and I don't know if this would work, but just thinking about things to try, and I wonder if a teaching story that had your child and the friend and with some photos in it, and then that's something you could read at home, and maybe that would help. It might not work, but it might be worth a try, something like that. Okay, so how do you know when to start potty training? That is a great question. So there's lots of lists of readiness signs, and those really have been designed for children without Down syndrome, without any special needs. And I think that for me, you're ready to start when you think it's time to start. There's no wrong time. I am right now working with individuals that, for a variety of reasons, they're in late adolescence and adulthood, and they've never been trained, and they are making progress. So you can do this anytime. Absolutely work with very little ones, and so you don't have to worry about the things like recognizing you go, not peeing for this long, because you can always start things. You can always make it fun. You could be like, we're in the bathroom, we're going to sit. You're going to sit when mommy sits. You're going to sit when daddy sits. So I don't think for me, there isn't a specific time to start or not start. I think generally, for all children, you really don't need to be doing a lot of this before 3, but sometimes children, I was in sleep clinic yesterday with a family, and this little guy just started, he's at an ABA center, and he's just a little over 2.5, and the ABA people are working on potty training. I would have said, oh, there's lots of other things to work on, but it was the team there thought that was important, and this little guy's making progress. So there you go. But it's a very good question. Okay, I Just have one. I hope I didn't miss any because right now I only have one question. Okay. Can you somehow train your child to poop at a certain time or encourage her to poop at a certain time? My elder son goes every night before bath, but my daughter with Down syndrome will go at different times throughout the day. Seems to be no pattern. Another great question. And the short answer is yes, you can. So it may not be that if your daughter just needs to poop more than once a day, that's her pattern, she may need to do that, but you can absolutely establish times where this is when we poop. And the way to do that is to have set times for pooping. And again, after meals is a very good time. And you could start to work. It's a slow process, but you absolutely can. And I think, thinking through making sure those poops, when you're pooping a lot, maybe she's absolutely fine and she just poops that often, but and I get what you're saying about it. Just seems to be there's not a pattern, but you could start making sitting times for poop after meals, which might be a really helpful way to start that. And then you also just want to make sure that those poops, is she fully pooping? Are there smears? What's the quality of that poop, to just make sure that that's all okay, and it really might be. But I hope that answers that question. It really does help to establish patterns. You may have experienced this yourself, if you just, for me it's true, I don't mind sharing this, that I just have to go to the bathroom before I go for a walk. I take long walks, and sometimes I'll go and I'll get busy doing a few things, and then I'm finally ready to go for my walk, and I have to go back to the bathroom because my mind is like, you don't get to go out until you've gone again right before you leave. So establishing those patterns really can make a difference. And it can happen for poop as well. And then you set up the circumstances so that person is, it helps for them to do that. They're sitting on their stool, with their feet supported, their knees up. There are other little tricks to help getting poops out during those times, like blowing out can help. Having a warm drink before you sit on the toilet can help. There's some abdominal massages that can help move the poop along. So there's some other things you can do to help encourage the poop to happen at a time when you've decided this is our time, we're going to try to get this poop out. Those help for people who have difficulties with constipation as well. Okay. How do you incorporate the schedule when they're in school? My 4-year-old tends to poop at school in his pull-up and will tell the assistant he's pooped. So he's recognizing it, but he doesn't want to go to the potty, or he doesn't mind having poop in his pants. Also, the potty watch sound is not the best to have in his preschool. Is there another timer suggestion? All right, so that is a really good question. A couple of good questions in there. So the potty watches also have a vibrating mode, so that most of them do, and you would, of course, want to pick one that did. So that might be a good way to go. If he's pooping at a specific time at school, I would say one of the things to think about there, if there's a real pattern to that, is what's happening around that time. Can we set up a trip to the toilet then? So this might be an example of a person who doesn't want to interrupt an activity because they don't want to miss, circle time, or they don't want to miss Play-Doh time at the table. So you may need to set up, like, before we do this fun activity, we're going to go sit on the toilet, and having a good reward for cooperating with that plan and pooping in the toilet can also motivate someone to do that. So I hope that helps with that. And I think it's about working with the school. I'll often, really great schools sometimes still need a letter from me or someone on our team that says, we think this is recommended, can you please do this thing? So getting data from the school, figuring what does the school need in order to be able to do this, and not just rely on your son to say, I need to poop, because he may be a few steps away from that yet, but he might be ready to cooperate with going if the conditions are set up well. He's not missing out on an activity he wants. He knows, in fact, he's going to get to do a fun activity after he sits. He's going to get a reward for doing this. He may need a little stool at school. Most schools are okay with that, to set up the conditions so it will work for him. Okay. My almost 6-year-old has lost interest in the potty again. He would sometimes go through the motions of using the potty, but he hasn't done that in a while. He's just started kindergarten. I feel like things are just so busy, it's hard to focus on potty training, and we're still not sure how aware he is of when he needs to go. He will hold his pee at times, and he typically only has bowel movements at home. Do you have any suggestions on how to at least slowly progress toward potty training? Really great question. I like what you're acknowledging around it's a new time, things are busy. So I really like that in terms of like, yeah, maybe this isn't the time to do like this massive potty program. Sounds like he's had some success before. So one thing to think about is what worked before, and do we need to put some of that in place again? That often happens, and it feels like, really, do we really have to go back to doing those things we did before? And sometimes the answer is, yeah, you do. They worked before, and now we have to sort of start at that step again, even if it feels like a step from long ago. But it often children then go through the steps a little more quickly the next time you do it. So that might be something to think about since things have worked before. I think giving yourself permission to say like, yep, we're not going to do a lot right now really is okay. The idea that if he's holding his pee, having a for some children, that's about needing to be prompted to go. So you want to think about that. You want to think about what else might be going on in terms of wanting, needing to hold. Again, making sure everything's okay medically. Sometimes you can use that though, right? Like if it's like, if he won't, he won't poop at school, but he poops at home, that often depending, he's 6, so if he's in a full day program now, that often gives you kind of a nice window to focus on the pooping, because it's okay not to poop at school. We don't like withholding. It's probably better if he feels like he needs to poop to just do it at school, but it's very common for children with and without Down syndrome to not want to poop at school. And as long as he's pooping every day and his poops stay soft, I think that's okay. And again, you can use that, right? Because it's like, okay, we've got from 3 or 4 in the afternoon till bedtime. You may be able to get a pretty good sense of when he's ready to poop. You can, if you don't know that exactly, you can figure that out while not putting him under, not having him need to actually use the toilet yet, but just kind of collect that data to know. And then you could set up a scheduled sitting time, that same idea of this is our time to poop, and this is we're going to do it. Have a nice reward system in place for that. Keep it low key, but have it be like, yep, we're going to sit and you're going to poop now. So that can actually kind of work in your favor around that. And that can sometimes happen with pee too. Again, making sure everything's okay with pee and poop, right? Holders always want to make sure, yep, we're not talking about constipation. We're still pooping every day. It's a number 4-ish, between 3 and 5 is okay on the Bristol stool chart. We're okay that way. We're not waiting too long to pee, and now we're going to use that to help focus like you are ready. So if I can, I can sit you down, we can get you in a good position. Maybe you can blow bubbles, blow a party horn. You can have some little blow toys in the bathroom. We've got our reward chart up in the bathroom. This great thing that's going to happen once you go. We can kind of work on that. And if you wanted to just to get back to your idea of maybe going very slowly, because I think I gave you a lot of ideas at once around this, is it could just be like, yep, we're just going to go in the bathroom and sit for a minute, because that's just what we do when we get home from school or after dinner or whenever you think's a good time. And you can keep that very low key, but you're sort of reestablishing like, yeah, we're going to do this. And then a little later when you feel like it's ready, then it could be for a long enough time that we're actually going to poop. And you can put some of these other ideas in place around that. Okay. And again, please feel free to follow up if you have another follow-up question to what I am answering. Is it better to teach boys to pee standing up? We chose sitting down, but was wondering if he'd be more willing to realize he needs to pee if he's standing. So I do think it's a matter of personal choice. It's another great question. I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think it's fine to pee sitting down. Some children are just much more comfortable with that. Sometimes it's easier because you're just sitting, so you can do your peeing and your pooping and you're all set. Some children do better standing up though. They don't like sitting down. Your boy, it can be fun to pee. This is where some of those tinkle targets come in place. There's also, you may have seen online, if you Google frog urinal, you'll get some fun little toy urinals that you can put up like in the shower or right next to the toilet, that can be very fun to pee in. And there's some that have a little spinning circle. So sometimes it could help. to do something like that as well, either because of not wanting to sit or because it can be fun to pee. I don't think there's a right or wrong about it. When I recommend things like that, it's really about kind of going with, figuring out where a child is with that and trying. And sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't work. But I think, I like that question, and I think it's definitely worth considering. I don't think that it will help him necessarily realize that he needs to pee, because the realization comes from recognizing those body signals. And again, that can often be very hard for children, especially children with Down syndrome. Low muscle tone makes it a little hard to recognize signs. It can kind of be hard to put it all together and realize that this feeling I have down here means I need to go to the bathroom and this is what I need to do. So it wouldn't necessarily help him realize he needs to pee, but he might like peeing more that way. And again, sometimes seeing models, if you have willing male participants who can help with this. And I've worked with great dads and great brothers who won't do it, and that's okay. You don't have to, but some are okay with that, and then sometimes that helps because that modeling can make a difference as well. Okay, so my daughter got ear tubes in June at the age of 4. She had been struggling with constipation her entire life until this point. After the ear tubes were put in, her appetite spiked. She started eating constantly, and ever since she has pooped every day. Wow, that's wonderful. That is great to know. I mentioned this to the ENT at a follow-up appointment, and he was not surprised. Maybe that pressure or slight pain from fluid in the ears was disrupting her GI tract or something. Have you ever heard of this? I actually haven't. I love that you shared that, and I appreciate it. It's very helpful to know that. I will say that constipation can be triggered by so many things. And I see so many children who, they're starting school and then they get constipated, or a new person came into the house, or there is a new therapist or a new something, and it comes out through GI. So I've heard, it fits with my own experience about small changes often making a difference. And I think what you said makes a lot of sense, that maybe it was pain and she was just constricted around a lot of things. If she wasn't eating, and if she wasn't eating as much fiber or drinking as much fluid. And it's interesting to me that the ENT was not surprised. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and I'm going to think about that more. It's one of the things I love about these talks and working with parents on this. I always learn things. So thank you for that. Guys have asked very good questions. If there are any more questions, please feel free. I would be happy to answer them. Yes, really, really good questions. My son will pee 100% in the potty. Yay, that's great. He will only poop in the potty 10% of the time. He does not have a set poop schedule. He's not scared, just so inconsistent. Any ideas? All right, another really good question. I would wonder a little bit about whether he's really, since he can do it 10% of the time, he's probably okay without his diaper. It's wonderful that he's able to pee in the potty. Don't know if he's peeing sitting down or standing up, but I would wonder a little bit about that part. I think that it's inconsistent, so it's going to be hard to figure out good times to take him, but I would be looking really carefully for any signs that he may be pooping. I would wonder too for him if depending on when he tends to go and how often, whether setting up a set schedule for him so he has the opportunity. So if you think he's okay about going in the toilet, but you're just missing those opportunities, and if you could just have him sit, you could think about about 15-20 minutes, half hour, again, you could collect a little data after each meal, have him sit. You maybe and promote use those strategies that help promote poop getting out, might really help. Want to make sure again that those poops are soft, that part of the inconsistency isn't related to constipation. He pees sitting, and and we have to avoid certain foods. Constipation happens easily, so he's had bad experiences. Okay, so when constipation happens a lot, I think, and I'm sorry he's had that, and I'm sorry he's had bad experiences. So you, a couple things to think about that. If it happens easily, I think going slowly does make sense. Having set times after each meal is often a helpful strategy for people with constipation. You want to make sure that if he's had, that he isn't any backed up at all, that he really has cleaned out so that he really can go. Those poops are soft for him. And if because so he's someone where you really want to make sure he's having nice soft poops every day, and you can always work with your healthcare provider around that to make sure that happens, since he's prone to constipation. I get that you have to avoid certain foods, so that may make it a little bit more challenging in terms of fiber, but there's making sure he's got enough fluid will make a big difference too, and so he may be withholding a bit around that. So I guess things I'd be thinking about, is there any possibility that he is still constipated? Frequent poopers may be fine. I want to be really clear about that. But if you're seeing lots of little smears, that can be a sign of either a colon still being stretched out, and or a person still having some stool in their colon backed up. And when that happens, the new fresh poop kind of goes around the hard poop that's in there. There's a nice video that actually my hospital, Children's Hospital, put out. I didn't make it, but it's excellent. It's called The Poo in You, and it explains that process of constipation and what can happen around loose stool, fresh stool going around old stool. So you want to make sure that you're not dealing with that now, given his history. And then I think having those scheduled times. Those would be some of the things that I would think about. So making sure about constipation, coming up with scheduled times, when he sits, having strategies in place that help him get the poop out, blowing, feet supported, knees up, maybe warm liquid before, try an abdominal massage, those types of things. Okay. Next, we've been trying potty training for our 4-year-old a few months now and haven't been truly successful. He still needs a pull-up, and we are still taking him to the potty. We're still, sorry, it kind of jumped around. So, still taking him to the potty reluctantly to pee, since he hasn't recognized he needs to pee on his own. When do we need to seek outside assistance? Well, anytime you feel like you need some help, I think it's always fine to ask for help. So I think that's a piece. I can't tell if you're saying that that he's reluctant to go, so you'll take him, but he's reluctant to go. It may take him quite a while to learn to pee on his own. So I would say that if he's on a good schedule and he's able to go when you tell him to go, and he's doing that, you're on your way. And then just the continued success and continued practice will help with that. But again, I want to go back to, if you're feeling kind of stuck and you feel like it would work with someone, I think you should do that. I mean, I think that's always, I work with families at all levels, as I said, from like adults who haven't been trained at all to real little ones. And sometimes people come into clinic and they're like almost there, and we just talk about a few little tweaks that may help, and others we're starting right at the beginning. So I don't think you need to worry about that piece if you think it would be helpful for you. So I hope that answers your question. If you have a follow-up to that, feel free to ask me. It can take, I'll just add, it can take some individuals a long time to be on an adult-directed schedule before they start recognizing signs and initiate in any way. So I consider it a huge success when individuals are staying clean and dry between adult-directed trips to the potty. It really can take some time for that to happen. And I think that's a huge milestone. So,
Well, if we don't have any more questions, I think now would be a good time to thank Dr. Katz for her time this evening